Do Bristling Hydra, Carnage Tyrant, and Hazaret have you feeling down, Control players? Don't worry, we've got Settle the Wreckage. Good evening, everyone. Late Night Mega here, and tonight we're playing Esper Control in Ixalan Standard. And Settle the Wreckage here is my new favorite card from the set. Playing with it at FNM was amazing. I loved it. So what this card does is for 4 mana, it's an instant, and it exiles all attacking creatures target player controls. That's amazing. It's a one-sided board wipe. It does not care about indestructible, hexproof, haste, whatever creatures. But then that player may search his or her library for that many basic lands and put them onto the battlefield tapped. So a lot of people have been saying that, oh, well, you don't want to ramp your opponent. By the time you're playing Settle the Wreckage, you want to be dealing with their threats. You want their threats answered. You don't care about basic lands. It's kind of the same argument for Path to Exile, and people saying that Path is bad because it gives your opponent extra lands. It takes away their threat and exchanges it for a basic land that's not a threat. And by the time you're playing Settle the Wreckage, your opponent can probably cast all their stuff anyways. But Settle the Wreckage does have a few subtleties with it. It has like 4 other effects on the game and deck building that we're going to get into. So, first of all, exiling all attacking creatures. That means not only does it act as really nice removal, it nullifies a combat step. No matter how many creatures are attacking or not attacking, you cast this card, you're not taking any damage in combat. That's awesome. So it's essentially a fog for control decks that acts as mass removal. That's great. Another thing it does is it does give your opponent a bunch of basic lands, which means for deck building, you do not want to have soft counters. So that means no Spell Pierce, no Supreme Will, no Censor. But fortunately for us, Standard is full of cards that act as hard counters. You have Essence Scatter for creatures, Negate for non-creatures, that's in our sideboard, and Disallow for anything. So yeah, it doesn't matter if our opponent has extra lands, their thing is countered. And that's how we want it. Another thing this does is, people have been telling me, oh, well, once they know that you're playing that card, your opponent's just not going to attack, or not attack with as many creatures. They'll just attack with, like, 1. And my reaction to that is, that's amazing. Think about it. I'm a control player, and you're telling me you're going to not attack me. This is Standard we're talking about, where like 99% of the decks rely on attacking with creatures in order to win. And you're not going to do that. Even if I'm not casting Settle the Wreckage, even if it's not in my hand, you're playing differently because of it. And to me, that's just generating value without me even casting the card. That's amazing. I love it. And another thing this does as far as our deck building is concerned is that since it's only going to exile our opponent's creatures, well, I mean, I guess it could exile ours if we cast it during our combat step, but I'm going to assume that we're not playing terribly. So, yeah, it's essentially a one-sided board wipe. Typically control decks, they play cards that say destroy all creatures or exile all creatures or deal 3 damage to all creatures, and as a result, control decks end up not playing a lot of creatures. But as you can see here, if you, just add up the spells and lands here, you could see that I'm playing 10 creatures in this deck. That's like double or triple what control decks would normally play for creatures. That's crazy. And yes, there's some odd one-ofs in here, like that Wander in Death. We'll get back to that. So, yeah, and another thing you want to do is, since we're playing more creatures, playing creatures encourages our opponent to attack with multiple creatures to get around our creature, and that's, again, plays right into Settle the Wreckage. I love this card. It's a great great control card. My favorite card from the new set, for sure. But yeah, since Settle the Wreckage isn't going to affect our own creatures, it allows us to play more creatures, and that opens up some deck building design space, which you'll see here more in a bit. So other control-y spells we've got our 4 Fatal Push. We're in Esper, so yeah, we definitely want those. And Skywhaler's Shot can deal with bigger creatures, so these are our 2 main spot removal cards that cost 3 or less mana. The biggest issue I have with both of these is that basically if your opponent has like a 3 mana creature with 2 power, it's like the hardest thing for these 2 cards to deal with. For Fatal Push, you'd have to like crack a Evolving Wilds in order to kill the thing. Yeah, so just be mindful of that. But Skywhaler's Shot, even at 3 mana, it might seem a little expensive for creature spot removal, but it does give you a nice Scry 1, and this is standard we're talking about, so 3 mana is pretty passable, especially with the Scry. I've been happy with it so far. Pull from Tomorrow's, it's a great one-of that can just refuel your hand. I'm kind of using it as like a Sphinx's Revelation, but without the life gain. But yeah, anytime that I cast this at FNM last night, I cast it for like 4 or more, and I ended up winning those games. It was very nice. I had a couple times where I cast it for like 6. Glimmer of Genius, you know, that's pretty standard for control decks. We are running the Aether Hubs, so that helps with that. And we've got one other card that will use energy. And Vraska's Contempt, another new card from Ixalan, which exiles a creature or planeswalker, and you gain 2 life for 4 mana. 4 mana might seem a little much, especially since we're kind of clogging up our 4 mana slot here, but that's been okay so far for me. We'll see how things play out. This is just the first week that I got to use this deck at FNM, and actually all 4 rounds I played against Temur Energy. Yeah, but fortunately this deck seems to be pretty good against it because I went 3-0-1. So yeah, if you don't like Temur Energy, play Settle the Wreckage. It's great. Vraska's Contempt, so, you know, typically you'd think 3 mana to destroy a creature was fair. 4 mana, I like the 4 mana. Well, I don't like 4 mana. I'd rather this be 3 mana. But for 4 mana, you get to exile the creature, which again is another great card against the indestructible things, the Scarab God, which is getting really popular right now. And you also gain 2 life, which is great against aggro decks and red decks, because I don't like losing to red decks. You're going to see that more when we get to the creature section of things. Also, since these 2 are instants, they can be reused with Torrential Gearhulk. Yeah, we're running 3 of those. Consigned to Oblivion, this is a it's just kind of a catch-all thing. You know, I can bounce an enchantment, bounce a planeswalker, bounce anything I don't like. I can then use the Oblivion half to make them discard it again before they can replay it. I was running 2 of these. I was running a Grixis deck for the weeks leading up to Ixalan. But and I was running a couple of these as like the catch-all answer there, since Grixis doesn't really have any answers to enchantments or... Well, it didn't have Vraska's Contempt to answer other indestructible or indestructible creatures or planeswalkers. Yeah, Vraska's Contempt can get rid of planeswalkers too. That's also nice. So yeah, I was using 2 of those. I don't know, it might stay as a one-of, it might leave the deck completely. So the other big reason I wanted to play Esper is the mana base. Also with Ixalan, they bring back the allied color check lands. And for Esper, that means we get all of the blue ones. Blue, white, and blue, black, Glacial Fortress, Drowned Catacombs. We're running 4 of each of those. What I really love about these is that with a card like Fetid Pools or Irrigated Farmland, either one of those will turn on all of your check lands for the rest of the game. They'll be coming in untapped almost all the time, and I love that. I love having the untapped lands. Aether Hub as well can act as a tricolor land, help you fix in the early game. Evolving Wilds, you can crack those to activate Fatal Pushes, and also help you fix your mana. Alright, so let's talk about the other things that we want to discuss. The creatures. Why is there 10 of them? Let's take a look at what we got. Yeah, we still have more weird one-ofs up here. So, 3 Torrential Gearhulks, which I already mentioned. I don't think they need any more of an introduction. Flash, 6 mana, enters the battlefield, it's 5/6, and you get to recast any instant from your graveyard for free. Yay! Regal Caracal is another creature that I wanted here. I wanted something that could stabilize the board, generate 3 bodies for 1 card, and gives lifelink to stuff. Well, it creates things with lifelink too, but gives your other cast +1/+1 lifelink. So for 5 mana, you get 7 points of power. 4 of it has lifelink, and these things are really silly in multiples. I had a couple games where I was dropping 2 or even 3 of them on back-to-back turns, and the damage output just got silly, and the life gain just got even more ridiculous. There's one game I had over 40 life. Yeah. Other creatures that we're running, we'll start with the smaller ones. Gifted Aetherborn. Death Touch gives you another answer to things like Bristling Hydra and Carnage Tyrant. And you can bring it back with Wander and Death and Lifelink, because I don't like losing to red decks. Gonti also has Death Touch. I'm using Gonti instead of Hostage Taker for a couple reasons. One of them is Death Touch, which Hostage Taker does not have. The second one is, while Hostage Taker can get rid of something that's on the field, if Hostage Taker dies before you get to cast the creature you hostagely stole from it, your opponent will get that creature back before anything else, and essentially nothing has really happened. But with Gonti, you can cast the card you take from your opponent's top 4 cards of their deck, even if Gonti is dead, which he'll probably die a lot. I had that happen. I also had Wander and Death to bring him back. Then I have a one-of Shielded Aether Thief. Now, my list that I was running last night, I had 2 of those and only 2 Settle the Wreckage, but Settle the Wreckage I found was a card that I wanted to have more of. I want to make sure I draw that thing. It's amazing. And Shielded Aether Thief, it's okay. I mean, it was never like the super be-all, end-all, all-star, but I never like seeing the second copy. So I'm just going to keep it as a one-of for now. This deck is still, under testing. This is a new format and everything, but this seemed to be perform as a fairly solid deck, and I was very happy with it. So Shielded Aether Thief, it can come down at instant speed. Whenever it blocks, you get an energy. So in the early game, if you have this, you can get energy to keep your Aether Hubs fixing your mana until you draw enough of your check lands to have everything fixed for the rest of the game. Or late game, you can have a bunch of extra energy and something to do with it. You can tap it, pay 3 energy, and draw an extra card. So yeah, it gets value throughout the game, but again, I don't really want to see multiples of them. A couple things you'll note that are missing, one being, the Scarab God, which is really popular right now. I just wanted the Regal Caracals to gain for the life gain primarily, and also for the 3 instant bodies at once. Scarab God, I also don't own any of them, and I wasn't chasing down a bunch of expensive cards that I didn't already have. Most of these things I had gotten in packs or bought previously when they were at lower prices, so yeah, I didn't have to invest too much into this, and I already owned playsets of the check lands, so Yeah, Wander in Death. I guess we can talk about this card. This is another. It seems really weird, but you know, return up to 2 creatures. We're running 10, so that means for 3 mana, I'm getting more value. It's all about just generating card advantage. It doesn't have to be by pure draw spells. It can be by like Wander in Death. Now that we're allowed to run more creatures due to Settle the Wreckage. And all of these really nasty creatures, our opponent doesn't really like seeing come back for more. They don't like seeing a Ganti cast on them again, or more Death Touch creatures, because that's essentially almost more creature removal. They don't like seeing more cats coming back, or more Gearhulks for that matter. But another thing you can do with it is in the early game, you can cycle it when you don't have your creatures yet. I ended up using both methods about equally at FNM, so yeah, it's a nice one of. Also, another weird thing that happened, because Settle the Wreckage doesn't already make my opponent play weirdly. I like when my opponent plays weirdly because I'm playing weird cards. Uh, Usually means I feel like I'm doing good. So another thing that happened last night is this was game 2. It was a post-board game, and my opponent magma sprayed my Torrential Gearhulk before shooting it with uh, Harness Lightning. Now, he had tons of energy. He could have just Harness Lightning the thing, and I got really confused because I did not expect to see Magma Spray in a post-board game, because Magma Spray by itself does not kill anything. So, yeah, and if a single Wander in Death is causing my opponent to do things like that, to me that's a win. Uh, yeah, like I said, I can always just cycle the Wander in Death away, but since our main win condition are those creatures, gotta make sure we have them, too. Alright, so that's all for the main deck. Another thing I was thinking of is since we're running white now instead of Grixis, I could replace this with like Cast Out, which I don't know why I don't have Cast Out in here, because Cast Out can also help cycle in the early game to make sure we get to 4 lands and all that, or later on in the game once we do its removal. And even just having it as a one-of can cause our opponent to bring in a bunch of enchantment removal for it, which again would be silly because it would be our only enchantment. And I like it when stuff like that happens. Sideboard. The sideboard is still under construction because, well, I only played against Teamer Energy, so I didn't make any changes to the sideboard. I have another Gifted Aetherborn in there for creature decks where I'd want more life gain. And so a lot of this is geared more towards decks that aren't heavily creature based. So yeah, if you notice, there's tons of removal in here, tons of creature counters and all that, because it's standard. That's pretty much what standard is about. But in case your standard is not about that, well, that's where our sideboard comes into play with 4 negates. 2 Forsake the Worldlies, Artifact Enchantment removal, also cycles 2 Crook of Condemnation. I decided to go with this one because it won't hit our own. Well, I mean, I guess it could hit our graveyard if we use its second effect, but if we use its first effect, we can just target whatever card our opponent is trying to use from their graveyard and nullify that, and just keep doing that over and over. But the Nuke the Graveyard option is there, but with Wander in Death and Gearhulks, we don't really want to nuke our whole graveyard. But if our whole graveyard does get nuked again, it's not that big of a deal because Wander of Death is just a one-of, and we can just cycle it for something else anyways. It's not like we need it to win, it's just something else that generates value. And that's what a lot of this is about, is just generating value between your creatures and between the Glimmers, the Wander in Death, the Pull from Tomorrow. You should be able to generate enough card advantage to just overwhelm your opponent. Other things in the sideboard: Duress for when we're in control mirrors, and 3 Kimballs, which I've played against this card. I've seen it pop up a couple times in Modern, and I hated seeing him on the other side of the field, especially once I get rid of them, and then my opponent just drops another one. And yeah, I'm really annoyed by that. So it must be pretty good for us to put in here as well. Again, that comes in against the decks that aren't super creature heavy. You could even probably bring it in against some of those red decks, because it can gain you some extra life as well. So that could be nice. And a second Wander in Death. Again, this is the most iffy card in the sideboard right now. I don't know what else to do with the sideboard. It's a new format, and you know, this is a new territory for me as a control player with 10 creatures. But if we're boarding in the 3 Kembles, Wonder and Death is kind of there to, the second copy is there just kind of make sure that we can keep the Kemble on the field, no matter how many times our opponent tries to kill it. So yeah, that's what that's all about. And that is our Esper control for the new standard. I'll be interested to see how this deck evolves over the coming weeks or months. But yeah, Esper is where I want to be as a control player in Standard right now. And we might go up to a 3rd Vraska's Contempt. Those were really nice as well. The life gain and the exile and hitting a creature or a planeswalker, especially if that creature or planeswalker is like a Scarab God or a Chandra or a Glorybringer. I hit a lot of Glorybringers with Vraska's Contempt and Skywhaler's Shot. This seems to be a pretty nice removal package. Another thing you could do instead of Skywhaler's Shot, which I'm not really considering here, is Impeccable Timing. It's a 2-mana instant. However, it deals 3 damage to an attacking or blocking creature. And the reason I went with Skywhaler's Shot is I can cast Skywhaler's Shot on the end step. So a lot of times what I'll do in the early game is I might take damage from something and let my opponent go to main phase 2, and then they try to cast something that I want to counter because it's more dangerous than what's already on the field. But if you spend your mana during the attack phase, you know, they can go to main phase 2 and resolve something nastier while you have a counter in hand, and so I like to avoid doing that. And then if they don't decide to cast anything, so like, okay, well, I'm good with this creature or 2 that's out here, then on the end step you can use your Skywhaler's Shot to kill their creature, and then they don't get to cast their other thing in their hand because we're on the end step, and then they have to try and cast it next turn when you have the counter ready. So yeah, and there's plenty of life gain in this deck to make up for any sort of life loss you have in the early game. So yeah, this is the Esper control list that I am playing. Let me know what you guys think. You know, I can, if this deck changes a lot, I might post an update. I could see some negates going into the main deck depending on how the meta shifts, probably in place of the Consign and maybe the Shielded Aether Thief if creatures become less popular. But yeah, this is where we're at right now. Actually, there's 90% chance this can become a cast out before I play this deck again. So yeah, this is Esper Control in Standard. This has been Late Night Mega. Good night, everyone.